So I will call this meeting to order. The Oxridge School Building Committee meeting on Friday, April 12th, 2019 at 7:30 a.m. Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
According to the agenda, first order of business is a motion needed to approve the minutes of March 29th. I know there were some updates to it. Anyone else have any comments around the minutes of March 29th? Motion to approve.
Motion to approve.
Okay.
Second?
Second.
Good. Next on the agenda, Randy, you've got the tie and bond RFP for a traffic study.
Yep.
I want to go over that.
Yeah. So we've working on this for like three or 4 weeks. We obviously we need a traffic study as part of the project to really measure the impact of the project on the surrounding area, to analyze capacity of what's going to be constructed here and what it's going to basically create. So we reached out to a couple of firms that were recommended by effectively people that are familiar with projects like this and firms that have worked with the town before. Bldg Comm is one of them, and Marone and McBroom was the other. We provided them with the information on the project that's available now. They both submitted proposals. They were, call them different levels of detail, but through some vetting and iterations with them, we were able to square them effectively. There was one big thing that came out of them that was a differentiation or something that we learned, and that was that there's certain levels of approval that may be required from the Office of the State, Traffic Authority, what's called the OSTA, the State of Connecticut. And there's two distinct levels there. We may not need their approval at all if the project can remain under 100,000 square feet and 200 parking spaces, which it currently is in terms of like the current concept. So that was interesting, and it has implications not only for like the timeline of the project if we reach that threshold, but also for the costs of the traffic consultant. So in both proposals, they're very comparable, I'd say, in price, and the costs associated with OSTA approval is very comparable too. It's about an extra, call it $7,500 to $10,000 of work to push through that process. But taking that cost aside, we discussed it. We had a couple of, we had one call and some communication with Michael and Mike Lynch over here to talk through the proposals, and we all basically came to the same conclusion that Bldg Comm effectively provided a more detailed scope of work. And a higher level of kind of responsiveness and care in the RFP process, and also Mike Lynch has had some personal experience with them working here in the town, and feel strongly that they could be capable of executing on this scope. So with all of that, we figured we would like to recommend to the committee to move forward with them. The cost is $20,000 if you remove any OSTA work, related work. It basically is in three main categories of work. The first is assessment, so that's measurement of existing conditions. So they will do an actual car counting mechanism out on, Mansfield? And then they'd also do some camera installations at 3 other locations, including the driveway entrance, where they basically do some manual count via video of traffic impact. The main scope of work is the actual traffic impact study itself. And then the remaining cost is really associated with what I would call communication. So that's all the different time associated with integrating with the design team and the construction team, but also with communicating to this committee and also to the different approval committees that are associated with a project like this. So all of that roughly comes out to $20,000. And from a timeline perspective, I think we circulated the proposal. They could get started as soon as possible. And absent the OSTA process, you're looking at call it like a 3 to 4 month time frame. So very much in line with all the stuff that we'd be doing during pre-construction and pre-development work. Does Michael or Michael want to add anything to that?
I think you covered everything.
Okay.
So the stipulations that you were talking about, whether we would need the OSTA requirement or not, is we would need to be both under 100,000 square feet?
Either.
Either. So if either one of those were to exceed,
Yeah.
then that would put us into a category.
Yeah, and there's a second level that's even more complicated, which both firms thought we would not need at all. There's like a second level of OSTA approval, and it only is triggered if you have to actually change the road work at all. So what Bond mentioned was if you needed to, for example, add a turning little lane or curb cut to basically improve that entrance area, that could be construed as something that was a material improvement to the road and could necessitate an even more annoying and higher threshold of OSTA approval. But, it speaks to their familiarity with kind of like that street itself. They basically were like, you wouldn't have the room, frankly, to do it anyway there. So they felt like it was very low probability that we'd have to actually trigger something like that. And it's great that we already have a turning signal there, because if that wasn't there, that would be something that would have triggered that level of approval.
The second part of the financial part of the proposal has some numbers for hourly services. Do we know what rates they charge?
Is it in the addendum here?
Yeah,
It's in the page 9, I believe. So it's a laundry list here of hourly rates, but very, very comparable to the other proposal that we received. Do you have that?
Yeah.
You might have cut off the 2-page print.
It's here.
Oh, you might have printed single page. It's too much, but it is what it is. It's market. We comped it to the other. I'm sure there's lots of overhead in there.
And Randy, is there any chance that we would break that sort of, I think you said a certain number of cars, 200 or 200 vehicles?
200 spaces.
200 spaces during construction? Is there a different category?
No, they were viewing it as per the permanent project.
Permanent, so it's for the permanent project, not for the duration of the construction,
Yeah.
Do you
okay.
know how many spaces are there now?
I don't, but they.
Those are permanent marked spaces, right? And that's not including like overflow
Mike
when
Lynch,
they're.
do you know how many
Right.
spaces are there now? About
report had
92?
Oh,
92.
so materially less,
And they're suggesting 110 in that study,
In the study.
Okay.
or
Which
115,
makes-
excuse me.
right.
Makes sense.
And that doesn't count overflow parking, right? Like when there's an event
Right.
at the school and people are parking on fields
On
and courts.
fields, I know,
right?
which
It's just
is-
the permanent marked
Right.
spots.
Right.
And my impression is that the studies that are conducted here don't really take into account special events.
Mm-hmm.
They kind of measure typical days, which I'd love to hear kind of some more feedback through the process from the school to hear, like, because we go there a lot and
Sure.
we're always parking on the field. So I don't know, you could probably count, there's probably 40 days a year where you actually have some significant overflow. So that should probably be contemplated, at least in terms of the site plan and the layout. Maybe they're not real spaces, but it's some sort of kind of buffer zone that's better than just parking on like, muddy grass or, yeah.
I would think the neighbors would be interested in that as well.
Well, Rusty and I spent some time yesterday up in Hartford, and one of the things that Costas asked us was if we were moving forward with a traffic study, and I said we're actually going to discuss it tomorrow. He did mention there were different levels of it, so I think we're on target with that. Yes?
If it helps, in all the building projects I've been involved with, there is, the decisions about parking are made on daily use rather than overflow for special events. I wouldn't really get into that.
Okay. Thank you. Motion to move forward with...
Move.
Second? Okay. Anything, Kate, on moving forward with the traffic study?
Not at this time, but
Okay.
I expect you're going to be talking about the architect. The traffic study would not be difficult to finance because it's only $20,000, but you're
Well, we
getting...
approved it last night we had an appropriation for this.
For this? Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
So there's money to do this. So.
Okay.
But yeah, you're going to have to, the next one I will have comments.
Okay.
Question for the committee on this?
Sure.
In terms of executing the agreement or the proposal, what's the process here? Is it a member of the
Selectmen
committee?
signs
The selectmen?
The selectmen
First
sign
selectmen?
everything.
Okay. Good.
All right. Thank you, Randy.
Thank you.
Next, discuss RFQ for project construction management. Rusty?
I assume everybody spent most of yesterday, last evening
All
on
night.
this exciting piece of document. It's a pretty standard construction management at risk RFQ. RFQ is really designed to get an understanding of them. There's no bid part of this or anything else, but it is an important screening process that we need to go through. This has been vetted by Katie, who corrected my spelling and grammar errors. And Mike, who also commented on it. Really, it's pretty straightforward. We plan on getting out next week in the newspapers, and we have a list, which I've talked to Katie about, of potential candidates that have been identified that have done work on schools or in Connecticut and have some of the prerequisites that we're looking for. It's a very tight schedule, as you might have noted, and it's integrated with the search for the architect, so the next 6 weeks or so will be pretty busy. Questions?
A question I have, Rustin. Would the RFP read different? RFQ, excuse me, read different if it didn't say construction manager at risk?
Yes.
Okay.
It
So
would,
there's certain-
the bulk of it is going to be the same. The difference is, as we described when I went through the options, is it's just like a GC who has a lump sum. The difference is that he switches from construction manager really to a constructor, like a GC, but they have a guaranteed maximum price. And the other big difference is that any savings that are accrued below that price goes to us, not the GC. So there's no incentive for them to kill us with change orders, and there's no incentive for us for them to cut way back and affect the quality. So the RFQ wouldn't be a lot different. The RFP, which will follow this, will be somewhat different and details more of the arrangement and all that.
Good. Any other thoughts, comments?
Speed is of the essence.
Yep.
I mean, this is a pretty standard thing, as Rusty says. I don't see any reason to doubt that, and I'll just get it out the door immediately. I think it's terrific.
Thank you.
I don't know, Kate, is there a motion needed to move that forward, to move forward with?
Not spending
I
money.
think
Yeah,
we're not
not-
spending money, but it doesn't hurt to, to approve the form of the.
Yep, good, thank you, John. Seconded?
Second.
Good. Thank you for approval to send out the construction manager at risk request for qualifications. Thanks, Rusty.
Rusty, if you would send me your final version today, and we'll get it in the vision.
We're just going to use, I read your last.
My last one?
Yep,
Okay.
and that's fine, that's perfect. But I want to talk to you about this after.
Yep.
Diane?
Yes.
You've been busy.
Yeah, lots going on. So last week, on April 4, on Thursday, we received 11 proposals from architectural and engineering firms. We reviewed those proposals. Rusty Schreiner and Mike Lynch and we went through the proposals, each of the 11 proposals very carefully. We used a sort of grading sheet of sorts with a series of criteria, and we, together between the three of us and our results, we came up with 6 firms that we recommend to the committee that we proceed with as semifinalists in this process. Those firms were Antonozzi out of Bridgeport, KG&D out of Mont Kisco, Perkins Eastman out of Stanford, Slam out of Glastonbury, Silver Petrocelli out of Hamden, and TSKP, Taisu Kim out of Hartford. And so if that's kind of agreed through the committee that that's an acceptable list, to a way to narrow down, we were going to go ahead and email those 6 firms today and notify them and move on to the next step, which is, as we laid out in the RFP, the next step is interviewing each of those 6 firms. And so what I would propose is that we have 2 weeks to respond to those 6 firms and come up with and narrow it down to 2 or 3 finalists. And Rusty and Mike and I agreed that 2 evenings would be desirable if we could find two evenings that worked for everyone on the committee, because we feel this is an important decision and everybody should attend those presentations or those interviews. We thought we'd like to see 3 architects each evening. So we were thinking perhaps next week, if we can come with 2 dates that work. We thought the format could be 40 to 45 minutes for each interview, after which we would have 10 to 15 minutes of review, and I'll provide each committee member with a grading sheet of sorts, so that we could each kind of give them, I guess, a grade of sorts in the end, with the similar criteria to what we used for this round, with a series of criteria, and then we could go on and meet with each one. So starting maybe at 6 o'clock and ending at 9, and see, and we should discuss that time frame, if that's too much time, whether we should decrease the length of the interviews by a bit. And we thought to do them, have that 2 evenings in somewhat close proximity to each other, so not too much time passes from one set of interviews to the other. Just looking at, and again, I can throw some dates out. We can discuss what dates might work, or we can also discuss that format if everybody agrees that makes sense.
Having just done 7 rounds of superintendent interviews.
You want to sign up immediately. For
exactly. Yes, thank you. And we did that on a Saturday and Sunday, which was very effective for us as a board. It also, there's a little difference with confidentiality in going through that process. I'm not sure that plays into, these folks kind of all know who's bidding on projects and stuff like that. The one thing I would say is that I think 45 minutes is good, 45 minutes to an hour. You always think that seems like a good amount of time, but when you get them in there and start asking questions, that 45 minutes goes very quickly. So that's the only thing I would throw out.
Yeah, one thing, if we can get the same group of people singing from the same hymnal in terms of questions and all that, that'll help with consistency and trying to make a choice.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I could.
I'm out of town next week.
So am I.
So
Okay.
there's a school break.
Next
Next week
is
is
spring
school
break.
break.
Okay. So maybe we need to move to the following week then. So the 25th is the day that we had said we would announce it, so we could look at
Announce the winner?
announce the
The finalists.
semifinals.
The semifinals.
Oh, sorry, the finalists, rather. We have the 6 semifinalists and narrow it down to 2 or 3 finalists. So we could look at the 22nd and 23rd, perhaps. I don't know, back-to-back nights
those-
is feasible.
I can't do the 24th, so the 22nd, 23rd would work.
Yeah, 24th is not good for me
24th
either.
or 25th don't work for me either, but the 22nd and 23rd do work.
Does that make sense?
I'm actually open to
23 works for me.
Okay.
Hold on, let me just double check.
6 o'clock, okay for everybody?
Let me just
Talking
check.
about John.
Board of Ed schedule.
Yeah, I'm actually available both those
Going
days.
here.
Oh, yeah.
Board of Education
6 to 9.
meeting on the 23rd.
Yeah, that's what I just realized.
Board of Ed meeting?
Yep,
7.
it's 7.
Right.
Who here is conflicted? Just you? Okay.
So if we started at 6, that only gets 1 in for
Yeah.
me.
We can fill you.
Yeah. That's fine. The majority of works for it, I think that makes sense.
Okay. I mean, the other option, I suppose, is we could consider the 25th and move back the date that we reply. by 9. Let's, stick to Monday, Tuesday. I think back-to-back nights is good, though it's a lot, I think, to sort of roll through it and,
It's like pulling two teeth. Get it over with quick.
right, so,
John, you could do those nights.
Both those nights work for me.
yeah, and Michael, you
works
said that's
for me
good
as
for you,
well.
okay.
Good.
All right, so, and then I assume we would hold it in this room?
Probably not.
Oh, probably not, okay.
This is the busiest room. I'll look at what rooms are available, but
Okay.
it also is something that you don't have to have in public session. So
Oh.
There we go.
we can find a smaller room, probably.
Okay, good, because that was going to be my next question. Mike had offered a story about a previous interview session that ended up on camera, so we just wanted to
Yeah.
make sure that didn't
Yeah,
happen.
no, we can, because it's part of negotiations, you can do it.
Personnel matters.
Okay.
No, not personnel, just a, strategy, but,
Okay.
negotiating a contract with a provider.
We could
Okay.
potentially use the Board of Ed meeting room also.
Okay.
Well, not on
Well,
Tuesday.
not on Tuesday
Not
night.
on Tuesday night, but on Monday night.
Yeah. This room might be free on Monday night because the Board of Selectmen is not meeting that week in the evening, so I'll find out what's available. and get
I
back
would
to you.
just double check, do they need any type of presentation type equipment or anything?
That's a good
or
question.
Electrical
Yeah.
hookups or?
Usually they bring
If
their
there,
own.
if there is no space, we do have those 2 small conference rooms. They're pretty large
Correct.
to meet with an architect in a group of this size, so.
Yep. Yep.
could always
Okay.
So
use
we'll
our-
find the, thank you, we'll find the space. Good.
They'll
Okay.
typically bring 3 or 4 people.
Yeah,
You might want to think about limiting how many they bring.
Hmm.
If you feel that, you don't want 7 or 8 people.
right. Okay. And, let's see, so then the times, and then as far as notifying the architects, I figure we're just going to give them a date and time and tell them that's when their slot is. If there's any major issue with it, we can try and shuffle it. But I think we set our 2 nights and ask them to come during those 2 times. Okay. Right, so, and I think that's everything. Just the next step after that, at least what we have on the calendar, is that the finalists will then present to us on May 9. So I don't know if we should just check everybody's calendars too, make sure that's still a good day. And if not, maybe we'll adjust that either now or at the next round.
One question, I don't know whether it would be helpful to give extra thought to the questions we want to ask them. And so this would be particularly around things we want to encourage or avoid in the design, and then their experience in operating under those parameters, right? So if we want something that's less aesthetic and more functional, cheap and cheerful versus expensive, I don't know what that is, but we might want to think about the things that we'd like to see as a result of the architectural design and sort of test their propensity to work with a committee like this and deliver on something like that. Versus them being someone that imposes the way they do things and say, no, I agree what you're saying, but no, you really have to do it this way. I don't know, it might be helpful, even people in the community that have dealt with this or dealt with the guys at Tokadika High School, just to flesh this out. I think that could be really valuable to have that thought through in advance. Kate?
Yeah, I think you should think about how long you want to give them to make a presentation. And then you should try and come up with questions that you plan to ask everyone. There will
Right.
probably be questions that lead out of that you don't necessarily ask every candidate, but you should have a set of questions that will help you,
Calibrate.
like John is saying, yeah, that you ask of each, so you should have those done in advance.
Yep.
It's a good point, because when we went through the cafeteria expansion, the initial presentations, I won't give out the names, but one firm was very clean, simple, aesthetic. Another firm had more wow and bang, and we wanted to kind of meet in the middle a little bit, overall watching the costs associated with it, so they had to come back to the drawing board. So formulating some of those questions ahead of time during the interview process.
The other thing you might also do is have them split up their presentation. So if they want a lot of materials and show us lots of cool stuff, they send that in advance and we can take a look at it.
Right.
But you could restrict them in terms of what you want to have in the meeting. Say, I want 2 pages, period, and you're going to have 10 or 15 minutes to go through that. And then we're going to ask questions and have a dialogue for 30 minutes. So we don't want a lot of paper, and we don't want to hear a lot from you in that meeting. We want to do that in advance. in the meeting, 2 pages only. I know, something like that, just to your point, we don't have a lot of time for each presenter,
Right.
and we want to make that, as efficient as possible, and B, maximize the time we have to pose questions from our list.
Yeah, typically they run 25 or 30 for their initial presentation, and then 20, 25 for their Q&A. We can have a clock sitting here with a buzzer on it.
And loud ticking, I like
Loud.
that.
Yeah, and I guess I'd be a little hesitant to ask him to send advanced material.
I don't know, just kind of forethought. I just,
yeah.
this, to your point,
No.
if it's 25 or 30 minutes, that seems like a long time, given the time constraints that we've got, but I don't want to unduly restrict them, but it strikes me that if they were willing to send something in advance, then they would feel more comfortable with our second request, which is 2 pages only for the actual discussion. I don't know, it's up to you. I don't want to
Sure.
micromanage that
Sure.
process.
Certainly take that into consideration. Yeah, so I think, like I said, so I don't know if there's anything we need to kind of agree on this, or we're just going to continue to move forward.
We've agreed on interview dates of the 22nd and the 23rd.
Right.
You'll organize the schedule with the specific firms.
Right,
And then you'll also notify the firms that aren't coming?
correct.
Okay.
And what about, are we going to determine a set of questions ahead of time before these semifinalist emails?
We usually give an outline of, here's what we want to hear about, boom, 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 boom. We want to, obviously the head guy's going to talk, but we want to meet the project architect, we want to meet the whoever, and here's some questions you need to answer.
Yeah, prior to that. And I guess if anybody has input as to questions that they feel are important, we could circulate a list of questions. As I said, I will provide a list of sort of criteria by which we're going to judge them. That might sort of dictate the questions as well.
Great.
Okay.
I would just caution you when you're circulating the list of questions, I assume you do that via email, please don't have discussions,
Right.
you know, individually send edits,
Mhm.
but don't be discussing it amongst yourself because that constitutes a meeting.
No
Right.
reply all.
Okay.
Great.
In light of the range of prices, I think you need to start thinking about seeking funding because, John, have you had an opportunity to look at the quotes from the architects? I don't think that the reserve contingency,
We have about $750,000 in the reserve contingency. I'm hopeful that these guys can take a down payment to get started on the work, which will allow them to move forward while we seek an appropriation to cover larger amounts. So that's kind of what I had in mind for that. But that's one of the other things we got to find out as part of this process. I don't think it's appropriate for an interview to talk about that, but to get an advanced sense of the terms around the amounts they would propose. In other words, can they take a down payment? Because we can pull that out of contingency and fund immediately.
Most of these firms do just monthly billing. You know, it's not more like a contractor where they want 30% down and things like that. They will
Okay.
go with month, you know, their startup costs, it's minimal. It's their
Yeah, the
their
reality
intelligence,
is,
really.
we're going to be able to fund that out of contingency for probably a while, but then tee up an appropriation. The problem is the RTM's not going to meet again after their June meeting until September. So we just got to make sure that there's going to be enough around to fund this while they do their work.
or
in
we start looking
anticipation
to
of that.
seek an appropriation in June.
And maybe that would be one of your questions to the firms. How do they bill?
Yeah, we could do that. We could also get just an appropriation to put in a contingency, and we just fund it directly out of that, so we have enough money. And then that way it's been teed up to the RTM, and they're not going to.
They know what it's for.
They know what it's
Yeah.
for, so.
Yeah, because we'll still, thinking about that, following on after the architect, we'll be looking to engage a construction manager. We may have more funding needs before September, and it's difficult to let out contracts when you don't have an appropriation.
I hate when that happens.
Yeah.
One of the other things
We'll definitely manage that.
we talked about, Mike and I and Diane, was to some extent the bids that are in there are apples to oranges. And we're asking, Diane is asking them, hey, we want to break out for your services, what's your sum? And then all your other costs that you need to include in there, because some had some of the consultants in there, some didn't, and so we're trying to, with this notification, we're going to get apples to apples, because there really is not that wide a spread as your initial look at those proposals would
Right.
seem to indicate.
And also a clear indication of the cost, the size of the project on which the project's being based, you know, what their estimate is on the square footage.
Right.
So we can, and then the breakdown of their hourly cost, but just to, so we can more equally compare the proposals to one another.
Good. Any updates? We can update the timeline in the Gantt chart with some of the decisions we've made today around interviews and meetings.
It just becomes important when we've got a lot of stuff going on at one time. Days, we'll have to adjust this one for Diane, but it's going to get hectic for the next few months, and we want to just make sure whatever work we're doing is integrated into a bigger calendar, unless you want to be here 7 days a week. No, okay. So, is there any specific, the site survey, is there anything going on there?
We approved it, I don't,
They-
so it's fun, I don't know if they've started.
They've been out,
Have it?
yeah, they were out several days last week, and they were out again this Monday and Tuesday.
But when are we
You
expecting
know when it's gonna
delivery?
be done?
Right.
I don't, they were just the workers out there, I didn't see them with the supervisors.
Can we
They were
follow up and check
measuring
on
the,
that?
You know,
Yeah.
inverts on the catch basins.
Could you throw a call into them, Mike, and
Sure.
see if they can give us a guesstimate date that we would have that?
Okay.
Yeah, because that would
Thank
be great
It's
if
something
possible
folks
to
are gonna ask.
provide to the architects before their interviews. I think that would give them a little
Great
more
point.
information,
Yep.
because we're asking them to have a bit of understanding of the project, and that would help their
You may be able to
understanding.
provide a draft of it if it's not complete.
Right, yeah, that would be helpful. We should add the traffic survey information
Yes.
onto this chart.
No, it is, it's on the second page.
Oh, yeah,
Anything
it's
we're
in
paying
there.
money for is in purple. Blues or freebies. Not including our.
So we're blue, right?
Yeah, we're cheap.
Rusty, all the CM dates have been updated. Compared to
Yes, I believe so. I haven't gone through it, maybe a day or two. No, I haven't, excuse me, we changed we gave them a little more time to prepare the RFQ. Even though it's an RFQ, it's not the same as an RFP. They thought, and I agree, that we needed a little extra time between the time they may get notified via the paper next Thursday. And we have asked them to do it, as you saw, in a every submission is going to be the same in terms of organization and stuff, so you're going to have to move back and forth on it, which will take some time. But no, it hasn't.
And the architect's phase is on the second page, the schematic design and design development. I think those are all seeming to be a bit later than what we're showing too. And of course, it varies from architect to architect, so we could do a bit of generalizing and shift those for now, or wait until we have a more final schedule with the architect. And then, Rusty, just procedurally, is it best just to email you any updates to this, or you're overseeing this
Yep.
this schedule? Okay.
Do you have any other comments on the architects or this process other than what we've talked about?
The only thing, anybody who wants a copy of the bids, who didn't already get them, we have them down in my office.
Was there any kind of preliminary schematics or anything, or was it all just a financial kind of
Lots of
text-driven?
narrative, lots of pictures of other.
Of other projects,
Projects, and financial, so no, there were in several of them estimates as to how many square feet they anticipated the building would be.
Okay.
There might have been one that said 100, but mostly it was like, the ones that did say anything were in the range of like 85 to 95,000 square feet.
And then 3 of the proposals include they've addressed the site a little more carefully, maybe provided a sketch or a narrative as to what their kind of very early design inklings would be or issues that they see arising specifically related to the site.
Specifically speak about the site and any difficulties with the site?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, some of them begin to address that. And one in particular sort of begins to address solutions, which
Okay.
I was kind of surprised at, but it was interesting to start
Good.
to see.
Good.
What about for the 22nd and 23rd? What would be the expectation of what we will have received?
Well, again, I guess maybe we need to decide whether we want anything in advance. I think we're asking them to come with a little more understanding of the site.
Okay.
And we're not asking them to do any design work at this point,
Okay.
but to come with a good understanding of the problems and the education specifications.
So it's more an interview of the firm, the people that would be on the project.
Okay.
More of a, how do we feel, gut reaction to people and presentations.
I think that's a good point. I mean, the reality is they wouldn't be on the list if they were not, in fact, qualified and have had experience in doing stuff like this. And so a lot of the interviews, again, without prejudging, is really going to be around fit and finish, culture and people. Could we work with these folks? Amenability to kind of our working style and some of the things that we want to accomplish. And look and feel, right? In addition, ultimately, to pricing. But in terms of qualifications and whether they could do this, that probably should be a minimal part of our questioning.
And I think you should all take at least the 6 semifinalists RFPs home.
Yes.
Yes. And just a perusal beforehand.
So I would recommend as you do that and go through those packages, if there's any questions that come to your mind or anything like that, forward them to Diane.
Yeah.
And maybe copy Kip and I on it. And that way at least start to see if there's any theme in the questions we want to ask or what we want to look at when they come in and interview.
Yeah,
Makes sense.
that makes a lot of sense. And I can plan to circulate sort of a list of questions collectively that I've received from you all before
Great.
the
Okay.
interview dates, if that would be helpful. Yeah.
Kate would like all that paperwork out of her office.
It's kind of funny, it reminds me of like being in a library or a school classroom with all the stats lined up.
And then big picture, it goes from that night 6 to 1, or
To 2 or 3.
2 or
3, depending on how we feel about the
So-
group. And then those
Okay.
2 or 3 architects, we will pay a fee, which we
Got
need to
it.
determine the amount will be, and ask them to start to actually solve some of the problems on site and better understand, dig into the project. And
Right.
we felt that type of a presentation will really give us a good sense of what the experience will be working with that organization.
That's the May 9th, right? That's
May
the
9th.
finalist presentation that we will.
Finals. Okay.
Can we confirm that works for everyone? We started down that path, so it works for me. But does May 9th work for everyone right now?
Yes.
I can make it work.
All right,
I'll have to move something, but yeah.
The interesting
Is
comment.
that going to be
from
an
the-
evening meeting as well? Sorry.
I would think
That's a good
so.
question. I would think so. That was
Yeah.
probably more practical for
Yeah.
us and probably also for the architects, I
Makes
suppose.
sense.
Yeah.
Yep.
I think so.
The interesting comment at the meeting Rusty and I were at when we talked about this, we said we were getting to the phase of looking at 6, and Costas perked up and he goes, how about 2 to 3? We said, well, that's the next phase that we'll get to 2 to 3. He was like, all right.
Okay.
So,
One of many interesting comments.
yes.
Who's that individual again?
Mhm.
Who is that again?
Costas Demantis, he's the director of Office of School Construction Grants and Review.
Okay. Wow. I didn't realize he would delve that deeply into.
He's
He's
a
good-
he's a lawyer.
We'll get, yeah, he's a lawyer by trade. We'll give a quick
Enough
update
said.
at the
Okay.
end. So, I know there was a meeting last night, a planning and zoning meeting. Some folks had emailed me about getting this on the agenda around the overlay municipal zoning application that's out there. There was a public meeting last night that will be continued. I know some folks here attended it. We've also had some meetings and been educated by Jeremy as to the overall process and what's going on. This is something that started over 2 years ago with planning and zoning in terms of the overall master plan for the town. So that process continues, and I think we need to continue to monitor that process. I don't know if anyone has any other feedback or comments around it.
Well, I'll first share, and Katie had in. I went to the meeting last week
Okay.
too. And I think what's interesting is there was a fair showing for a meeting of,
Good.
a focus around these 13 properties. One of the comments that John Cini shared is the coincidence of the application by the commission had nothing to do with us as a building committee,
Okay, good.
which I felt good about since I am one of the
Yes.
neighbors, and also opposing the town's proposed amendment. I think what came out of it is there was a broad set of individuals from neighbors of not only Oxford School, but firehouses and others that wanted to hear the details of the proposal, and that the committee, obviously, as you mentioned, will continue it into May because of the large number of people that showed up, and also that the committee doesn't have any time frame around making a decision. Since the town is the applicant, they don't have a 65-day window for deliberation for a decision.
Okay,
So we
good.
would kind of call that out. I don't know if Katie.
Yeah, I think that my main takeaway from that was the thing that kept coming up as a theme across all the different properties, as you were saying, different neighborhoods, was that people were asking, why are we making this a set of rules across all of these properties versus a case-by-case basis as they come up? So like, for example, Oxridge could come up as we're planning something, but a lot of the other properties didn't. So I think that sounded like what the Planning and Zoning Committee would kind of need to go back and decide if they were going to justify doing the whole thing. So.
So we'll continue to monitor that, and as a group, if I know Jeremy has offered to come and continue to educate us around the process. As always, there's plenty of reading material out there around this on the website. So
Yeah. I mean, I think on that note, we as a committee need to service as that liaison to planning and zoning,
Yes.
to any of the town members, with regards to the site plans, the construction drawings, the schematics, as they become available.
Yep. I think the one thing in spending some time with Jeremy and is critical as we go through this process, and I know some of these folks have already probably spent time maybe down at town hall or walking the property, but Jeremy said the key to all of this is, once we get down to the finalists, is spending time with his department and understanding the site, how we work, and he said it just adds a lot of value to the overall process, and the sooner the better. Good. All right. Rusty and I, just a quick update, Rusty and I went up to Hartford yesterday and met with the Office of School Construction Grants and Review, Costas, who's the director up there. We also met with Kermit, who is one of the architects and would be potentially a project person should we go down the path of applying for a grant. And we actually met with Tim O'Brien, who's another member of the committee that's kind of organizing the whole process. There's been a lot of changes up there in terms of streamlining the process. Overall, when we kind of laid out what we've done so far, Costa said, well, you guys are really moving along. You seem to have everything in order, which was good to hear. And then we talked a little bit about grants and rates and different things like that. Do you want to add some color there, Rusty?
Sure. They themselves are in a transition mode to this much higher level of service. They wanted to make sure that everybody understood that they're there to assist and help, not hinder the process. I can't remember what I said to them. We got a pretty good laugh about that.
Not hinder and not hurt.
Yeah. There are differences in the percentage that you get. New versus renovation. We were caught a little bit by surprise that for new construction currently the reimbursement rate is 10.71, not 20, of approved project. There are a lot of exclusions. One of the things that concerned us most is in calculating the dollars for what the construction will be. They're using a rate that you can't find down here in Fairfield County, which we raised that issue, and apparently other schools in Fairfield County said, hey, you know, $365 an hour might work up in the Hartford area, but it doesn't work down here, which has the effect of lowering again the reimbursement total. Let's, for example, if we had 40 million in construction, they'd give us 30, they would only calculate it on the first 33 million. There are a lot of other little exceptions there. He did offer, because he knew we were getting a little questioning whether we should go down this road. There may be another 5% for the early learning program.
An additional 5% reimbursable?
Yeah, an additional 5% reimbursable.
On the whole project or just the portion that applies to early learning?
So they would add
Total.
the total, so the 10.71 would go up to 15.71.
Right, right. There are a lot of requirements to go through this. I mean, they're involved to the point where initially they will do a site visit and they will tell us whether we will do a new school or renovation. Change orders all have to go through them and stuff. I mean, it's their money as well as ours, so they want to make sure that it's being efficiently spent. And I get that. We're just going to have to weigh what the cost in terms of time and money will be to work with them versus the potential reimbursement, total reimbursement.
So Russ, you're saying they would come down, visit the site?
Yep.
And if they say, no, we think you can renovate the school, does that mean then if we decide we want to build new, no
We get
grant
nothing.
money?
They're out.
We're
Yeah,
out.
so what does renovate mean? Does that mean we tear it
Renovate
down except for the
means-
chimney and that's a renovation?
Well,
The question
raised
we
that-
run, I'm sure
I raised
you
that
did.
question because I'm thinking of the house on Gorham's Pond. They left one little beam for that house.
Sold.
Yeah, to renovate.
And he laughed at it, actually. It actually is defined, and it has to have 55% of the original building still there.
We're not going to do that.
No way.
Of course not. The other thing that came up was that if we scrambled around, we've got 3 of the 4 requirements done or near done. If we scramble around and get the authorization to spend X, up to them, we fall into this current year, and that carries over. And that's the rate that we would be done, because we asked them, hey, how about all this stuff that's going on about the 5% reimbursement or the 0 reimbursement? We discussed with them a little bit of the difficulty of doing that since we don't have an architect yet. He said, look, here's the form. As soon as you pick the architect, have them fill it out, and it can be an estimate, and of course, the problem will be getting it approved, because we're really approving it on nothing. So it was an interesting meeting. There's a lot to think about. But the other, clearly, if we do go with them and look for reimbursement, we are going to have outside assistance to help us with it. It's just an enormous amount of paperwork.
Yeah, that was one thing I was going to ask, which is at what point do we decide to
But you
engage
need
a
an
third
owner's
party
representative
for grants?
for just focusing in on the grants. As you know, we've had some inquiries from 2 or 3 people who offer a lot of different services, and we can pick and choose which of those services we want. And he gave us some guidance. He gave us one name, but he gave us a guidance what to look for that type of person. And I don't know if, Mike, you've worked with an owner's rep on a big project before? No.
Well, one question would be, does it make sense to engage one of those folks to work with us to help us decide if we want to go down this route? So in other words, to say that they get a download from the meeting that you had and said, okay, let me give this some thought and I'll make a recommendation as to, yes or no, and if yes, what I could do to help you navigate that process.
That was my personal feeling. I went on to their state's website because they referred that to us. I nodded off 2 or 3 times during a couple hours. I was trying to read it. It's If you could take a sentence and make it a paragraph, they've made this a book. And it is very complicated. The problem is there's so much detail in there. And unless you handle this stuff every day, you're going to trip up.
So I
The
think-
answer is yes.
Yeah, I think John's
I think it
point's a
might
good
be
one.
a good
And,
idea.
I mean, if it needs to be an unbiased party, though,
Yeah.
not somebody who,
They
with
may
a
have-
certain answer, will get the job and then
may
become
have-
the owner's
Well,
rep.
that's why we make
But-
it clear up front that they're not the guy to do this if we do that work, so to
Yeah.
ensure that we in fact get an unbiased view.
And
So-
could
They
we
they
do,
actually made a point twice on that exact issue. Make sure this is a person that's working for you, is in no way tied to any contractors, construction managers, architects, or anything.
So I have to question the big picture of this as well, though, because right now it seems like we're talking about spending money to have someone advise us on whether or not to apply for money. So there's a cost into that. And then if we apply for the money, I think that we have to consider what time we're adding to the project. Because there are going to be costs in delaying our students moving into the new building also. Oxbridge is not functioning well and is, really it has a lot of costs just to keep it as is. So then the other thing I think,
Can I comment on that?
yeah.
It shouldn't add time. I mean, one of the things I came out of there with, these are professionals. Their frustration and the reason that a lot of this stuff takes time is because the school districts are not providing the information on a timely basis. For example, change orders. They're getting change orders years after they happen. We
Well-
can give them immediately. and
So that's a good point for us to stay on top of
They will assign a
it.
specific architect to work with us and will not slow the
However,
project
if we don't make a June 30th deadline, then that's a significant amount of time. We're looking at an entire year, assuming that there's not an extension into September.
I mean, one of the things that this first sort of grant consultant, a question that person would answer, it says, by the way, here's the money, here are all the hoops you have to jump through to get that, and if you go down that route, it's going to add X time to the project.
Right.
So we get that work done, and we can take a step back and say, in the scheme of things, is it worth it? And you raise an excellent point. If that particular dimension comes out and it's bad news in terms of impact on timing, and we'll let the professionals tell us whether it is or not, that adds into our decision.
But I think I heard you say that you can actually get a placeholder in somehow.
Yes.
He was basically saying like, oh, just get the form in.
Right.
Have enough like sketches on it, and then you'll be grandfathered into the program.
Yeah, but the key to all of that is,
Right.
and where Rusty was heading, and this is, I think, a further in-depth conversation we need to have with John, the Board of Finance, and the RTM, is we have to have the funding resolution
Right.
for
That's the
40,
part.
45, 50, $55 million. And that is part of the package that has to go up there for the approval process.
Can you caveat that?
He made it very clear that his goal is, and he is, touting his numbers, he's saved the state $1.5 billion over the last 5 years that he's gone up there and kind of made this group more efficient. Like to know where that money went, right, John?
I'll tell you where it went into their offices.
Oh,
You
my
should
God.
see the offices they just moved into. They purchased buildings all over Hartford. These guys have a 16th-story view of the river, and I'm going, like all marble.
Rusty and I walked in and
These
said,
are state-
here's
these are
where
state
all,
offices.
here's where all the state money is. It was a brand new, beautiful
It's
office.
just unbelievable.
So to your point, look, his goal, he was very clear. He said, look, I think you can get all that's needed. He said, your town process is your town process, and I get it. And a lot of these town processes take time, and you've got to get the right people involved. But his goal ultimately is for us to get shovel in the ground as quick as possible, especially if it's a failing school. So, Kate?
Would it make sense to try and get them out there as soon as possible to do this opining on whether
Right.
they will approve our building new?
Yes.
Because if they come out here and say, you've got to renovate, I
that's the
think
end
the
of the
decision's
process,
already
right?
made.
Right,
So-
but I think based on, he liked the fact I brought up the KG&D study, I brought up the documents about the school survey, I brought up the documents about what Mike Lynch has put forward in terms of the maintenance and different things like that. He was very interested in the number of kids in school, the fact that we were consolidating ELP. I don't think it's an issue of them approving a new school. I think it's more the issue of the process and getting the funding resolution. Dr. Elliott?
I'm used to getting 20% reimbursement, not 10%.
Mhm.
you're doing, that, I can't say how critical cost and time analysis is, because
Yeah.
it's very likely you'll reject taking the state aid. It'll be offset by loss of time and the increased expenses you have going through the process. I can only give, one example. I had school lunch, an independent contractor on school lunch, and with an independent contractor, you profit from, and the school district gets some of the profits back. And I had to make a decision: do we stay with the National School Lunch Program and get that reimbursement, or just toss that out and go independently?
What did you decide?
And we decided with dumping the National School Lunch Program, it just didn't pay for us because it was holding back our profits as we introduced foods and different kinds of foods at the high school, for example. The federal government said they'd have 2 ounces of meat in a sandwich. Our kids were used to having a half pound of deli, at the deli that we had in the high school.
And you wanted ketchup to be a vegetable anyway, so.
I think sometimes you just have to, I know it sounds good to get the reimbursement, but sometimes it just doesn't pay.
So the next piece of that too is the political landscape that's going on now. Like, there have been so many comments. Like, I'm curious as to a person that we might bring in to advise us. How likely is it, even given the new leadership in Hartford, that that we would even come close to actually getting that 10% or the 15%, and also that they would give it to Darien? Like, how is it?
So that's
not a choice on their matter. There are
No.
rules, and it doesn't matter
Right.
what our wealth level is.
Right.
I mean, we would be impacted by the cost of construction being higher there than what their allowance
Right.
is.
Right.
However, if, the rules say they have to give us this much for these things.
Right.
And it doesn't matter whether you're Darien or Bridgeport.
So they don't have the discretion to,
They don't have
to
the
your
discretion,
good
yeah.
point.
But
If
If we do it before June.
It's probably behind the scenes,
If we
So
get,
that is only for this year.
It's
That
in
can
order-
change for.
yeah, it could change
So
with the
that's-
new
okay,
legislation.
because there have been comments about continuing current
it could
projects and
change
not
for next
starting
year. He
new.
was very clear
Okay.
in the conversation. His recommendation is not to change for specific Fairfield or wealthier towns. He feels by continuing to do an okay level of reimbursement, they maintain some control over what towns like us are doing in terms of building schools. They want some say in what we're building. He recently had a town up there that wanted to build a school for 150 people, and he's like, it's not going to happen. I'm not building a school or reimbursing you for 150 students. You should go to your surrounding towns. So it's their own little way of controlling the regionalization question that keeps coming up. But the 10.71 is the committed rate that we would be reimbursed on reimbursable space and items. And the 5% that he would try and get us is based on some additional information he needs on what we're doing with the early learning program. Could it change next year if we apply? Absolutely. But the 10.71, if we go in and are approved and become a priority school, as he said, then that would be the reimbursement rate. But if they come back to us as we go through the process and get the drawings and the cost, they may approve, the school may come in at $40 million. They may approve $33 million. Their reimbursement will be on the $33 million, and the $7 million is on us, over and above that.
It is doable.
Yeah.
The downside to going for an appropriation in May or June, the RTM, is that we don't have a real good handle on what the dollar amount is.
Right.
So we either estimate high, or we do a very good job of educating the RTM that there's a distinct possibility we'll be back for a secondary appropriation.
Yep.
It is doable if you want to go that route. I
And the-
think
and the
John
rationale-
is right that we may want to consider hiring somebody to do an analysis and give us a really good firm idea of what it would cost us, what we would lose in state grant money. I find it hard to just turn our nose up.
Yeah, I have the form here somewhere. He did say that most of the firms are, and we went over the firms that we were talking to. He said any of these firms could do this in their sleep in terms of giving us the cost estimate worksheet that they require. He said this is nothing that will surprise any of the firms that we're working with in terms of giving us the costs that we need to go through our
So-
approval and funding.
So would the next step be to say, let's find someone that we could hire for this discrete project, which is, what the heck do we do with all this? And get them kind of on the payroll and going immediately?
Correct.
And let's see what happens out of that?
The other part that I think is important is that we can integrate into the finalist presentation an estimate of cost. And we can give them the form. Unfortunately, the state uses their own form. There are programs that every estimator, every construction manager, every architect uses. Rather than do what everybody else does, they have their own form. But it's literally a 3-pager. I have a copy of it. And we can get pretty close. I mean, we know down here, per square foot, you're going to be running $450 to $475. That's what it is going to be.
Including soft.
No, and then we can estimate at the soft costs, which again is not that difficult for a CM or an architect to do. And maybe we can include that in what we want to hear from them, the 3 finalists or 2 finalists. And give us your best, because he kept saying, the architect will do this. But we're talking about potentially 15% of 33 million. Plus some of the soft costs. They said they might even reimburse us for the studies that are already done. And so we're talking $5 million versus after June 30. Let's say we get the best case scenarios, we'll probably get 5% of some of that.
If it ticks down next year, you mean?
If it dips down next year.
It may
So
not.
you're talking.
He said it may not.
It may not, but there's a lot of pressure to
Yeah.
put it on. But you're talking several, $2 to $3 million differential here that I think is worth 10, 15,000 to get somebody in here and who knows what this is all about.
I mean, I would set this in motion in terms of getting some help to get us to make this precise. I do this
Yep.
immediately. We ought to set that in motion today.
So we've got a couple of proposals. Okay.
And Rusty, is there also a parallel track of saying to the state, we're going to go ahead and get them moving as well to perhaps come down and look at the site?
he just-
so that
All I have to do is give him a phone call, and he said he'll provide some dates, and they'll come down here. He
So
said he's
okay.
at a site several nights a week.
And if
throughout
2
the
weeks
state.
from now we hear from this consultant and they say, stop everything, it makes no sense to do this, we just
Right.
stop, but let's get the process
Yep,
started.
exactly.
Is he the
Yeah.
decision maker
Yes.
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 and reasonable person?
As reasonable as a lawyer will be.
Okay.
That was encouraging.
Yeah.
The
No,
CM firms can do the two.
He's
by the way.
very straightforward.
Yeah.
He answers your questions. He asks you the right questions. He's the type of guy, I think, from the timing point of view, he wants us to get going. He wants to do it. I think Kermit even told you that they've got the money there.
Yeah.
They have the money. There's not a lot of schools being built right now. And they were enthusiastic, you know, we're signing you an architect, and I mean, they want us to do this.
They said we've got all the right steps that we've gone down
Yep.
so far, and everything that we brought up to show them. So. All right.
Thank you, guys.
So-
That's
Sure.
great work.
Yep.
Like,
It's good. It's a good meeting. All right, so John, to your point, I think we'll move forward with looking at a couple of the proposals we got and even calling that person that you
And
recommended.
should we approve to empower you guys to get it?
Okay.
I guess Jamie would sign any kind of agreement.
Yep.
And just whenever you decide, just do it.
Right, we'll make a motion on the floor to move forward with looking at a potential consultant to help us look at the state process of applying for a construction grant.
And then further, we would approve you guys to just decide, get Jamie to sign this and move forward immediately.
Okay.
Okay.
Second, first,
At what
Second.
cost
do
approximately?
you want to put a limit on the cost? The one,
What's the, do we have
the
a,
proposals have been around $10,000 or $12,000.
So we're gonna put a little
put
more.
15,000 down and just go for that.
This is going to be a rush
For
whoever does
15.
it.
Up to.
And this is just for preliminary feedback on whether this works or not.
Yeah, this is a feasibility study
Right.
with the
Doesn't
clear,
make sense for us to do this.
right, with the clear provision that this firm
go.
or individual would not be engaged for the grant work should we decide to pursue it.
I think I'll bring up the proposal, the one, they're very specific, so we can almost push them to do this almost on an hourly type
Yeah.
basis.
Nice.
Okay.
great,
Get
fantastic.
it inside. Good.
So all approve of that motion? So
Yes, everyone
15,000?
approve?
Yes.
Aye.
Yeah, I think that's a responsible way to manage
Yes.
it, and to really evaluate the monetary and time issues and
Right.
make a decision based on a little more knowledge.
Absolutely.
John, any suggestions on spending some time with the Board of Finance and RTM and Kate?
Yeah, I was actually thinking I would call you later today and we
Yeah.
could strategize about an appropriation strategy to try and get this in place, or think about getting it in place, so that if we do decide to go down that route, you've got
Right.
an appropriation that you can flash to these guys and say, yes, this will happen.
Because it just goes against what we're trying to set up, how we manage the
Well, that's
building
what
of
I
the
want to talk
garage.
about.
Yeah, unfortunately, if we go with the state grant either way, this year or next year, we still have to
You got it, yeah.
get the appropriation in place before we can bid it.
Right.
So-
Exactly.
So I think what we need to do, or be doing, is we're pursuing state grant money, we need to be educating the RTM and Board of Finance, Board of Selectmen that, look, we know this is an estimate, we don't like having to
Right.
do it this way, however, we're giving you our best estimate, and just line them all up so that they know where, you know.
And I'd even be willing to come in with an estimate that's clearly in excess of what we would end up spending, just because it's branded as such. Look, you guys are not going to spend anywhere near this amount of money.
Mhm.
We're going to put this in place to enable several things that we need to get to work as part of this process, so that when we come back to you, we'll have something that really makes sense, but we need this to move forward, something like
Yeah, the
that.
reality is they're only going to give it to us on 33 million plus some of the soft costs. So
Right.
you're right, if you put it up high,
Well, then we're completely covered on this dimension, then we can
Yep.
come back with a smart bid and package later.
Yep,
Good. Okay. Good. Thank you. A little beyond our hour time that we like to stick to, but good conversation. Anything else that we want to put on the table?
Just a general comment, which is, so we talked about the grant process and kind of accelerating that process by the approval we did today. Is there anything else like that that's a gating issue or slowing us down, or anything that we could just jump on and get moving, or that needs a vote of this committee or some kind of funding, just to make sure nothing is slowed down? I mean, it seems like we have everything in hand, but with the collective here, I just thought I would ask that question.
Yeah. There were some other studies that he mentioned that he said the architects and all would know about in terms of state testing around water and different things like that, which we spoke about at a recent Board of Ed meeting, that we do regular water testing. The key is, he said, the testing is the water coming in from the street, not necessarily the water in the buildings. So the traffic study.
So back to any environmental testing on the site.
Yeah.
It's my understanding that the town is
Mhm.
doing that work, that,
Right.
you know.
Well,
Is that something we need to initiate? Or?
Yeah, it'll be part of the project, but it is one of those things that would be a good thing to have done, like environmental testing of the existing building, so that we know we don't have the kind of thing that happened with the high school, where we were surprised with the level of asbestos when we went to demolish the old
Demolition
building, and
purposes.
that had cost.
Just say no to renovation.
We have the,
But we have
you have that proposal
Right.
from Hygienics.
Did we move, at the last meeting, did we move a motion forward to move that?
We
We
did.
did for the first
Yeah,
part,
okay.
which was a survey of the building.
Right,
Yeah.
good.
Yeah.
So,
the only other thing I can think of is the test borings and the determination
I have
of
the
the
three,
water.
I got the third proposal on the test borings yesterday late in the day, so I didn't have a chance to hand it out.
Who's going to do the testing for the water table one?
Yes,
Okay, that's all.
yes. I gave them a basic square
mhm.
and said, here's where we're going to build the building, so they would put a monitoring well at each of the four corners, and then I had them give us a price per day with the drilling machine to
Mhm.
make test wells around the property, and I told them figure 2 days.
Okay.
So they gave me all their pricing, what it would cost to have the soil tested. A lot of the testing they do right there on site.
Okay.
But if we wanted it tested for contaminants and stuff like that, we'd have to go out to a lab. But like I said, I got the third proposal yesterday afternoon, so I have to hand it out to Randy and Mike to take a
There's
look
nothing
at.
else that came up in our conversations, but good point. If there is, we'll bring it to the table.
Yeah,
Do we
your
want to
next
look
big
at,
sticking point
yep,
is zoning.
what's that, Kate?
Your next big
Yeah.
sticking point could be zoning, you know, your setbacks and stuff.
Right.
So that's a ways off.
Yep.
Hey, but with the new municipal use policy, we can go up to 8 feet next to a neighbor.
But we don't know when they're going to do that.
We're only gonna do that.
Let's move on. Let's move on to the next conversation. Do we want to look at scheduling the next meeting?
My last question.
Let's look. We want to look at the 26th of April.
That works for me.
Does that work for everyone right now?
Yes, that's fine.
Well, let's do that tentatively, and then we also have a lot we'll be doing between now and then, and
Right.
we'll build the agenda from that.
We're meeting the 22nd and 23rd of the
Yeah,
same week
exactly.
for the interviews.
All right. So let's put a
Tentative
place.
at 7:30.
7:30. Let's put a placeholder on that, especially if we need to do some follow-up from our interviews and other meetings. All right. Good. Motion to adjourn.
Adjourn.
All in favor? Aye. Thanks, everyone.